Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a special guest. I've been on his YouTube channel. We've had some discussions on a variety of topics, and we've been friends on the internet for a while, it seems. But his name is Brandon Young. His Twitter handle is probably the best way you can contact him is Brandon Young 82, Brandon Young 82, and he also has a YouTube channel with some great interviews. He's done interviews with Thomas Sheridan. He's another guy by the name of Razimus, who's kind of an anti-occultist. I think Brandon Young describes himself as an anti-occultist, but he can tell you more about that. But tonight we're going to talk about a person who is causing a lot of consternation within the UFO community. His name is Corey Goode, Goode, and he believes that he is some type of intermediary with UFOs, particularly these Blue Avian UFOs. And he runs a website that's called the Sphere something Alliance. What is it? What is it again, Brandon? The Sphere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And uh, Brandon has agreed to be on the show tonight to talk more about this. I've kind of followed it a little bit on Facebook, but I haven't really gotten into the kind of the real details. But I find this to be a very interesting subject for a variety of reasons because somebody who I think this guy's only been around since about 2015 comes on to and enter into this kind of scene and almost like drops a bomb and blow. You know, everybody has an opinion about it. So Brandon's going to talk more about it. Brandon, thank you for being on the show.
William, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's always great to talk to you.
Likewise, likewise. So tell us more about this guy, Corey Goode, and tell a little bit about, why don't you start by telling a little bit about yourself and then talk about Corey Goode.
Okay. Well, I am basically a trained legal scholar. I graduated from law school, still going to pass the bar exam and stuff like that. So also part-time, always a part-time student and teacher, I would say. I kind of operate in the kind of what people would call the real world, other than just sort of investigating and researching all the time, which I would love to do. But I do that as sort of a side hobby into, philosophy and lots of different questions unrelated to the UFO paranormal sort of conspiracy theory community, or the alternative media community. They happen to coincide a lot of times, which is really great. And yes, I do run a podcast called the Anti-Occult Cast, and the meaning of that means sort of to expose the occult. So for example, we'll read some occult grimoires or occult books, like say Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry or Manly P. Hall, and kind of just go over the sort of occult, like, because people aren't really aware, I feel, especially my generation, of the occult themes that are really out in the open right now. And I feel like this is an age of sort of the revealing and awakening up into that. So what the Anti-Occult Cast does is sort of try to bring up these topics and discuss them with a variety of different people and perspectives.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, you definitely cover a lot of different topics and really interesting stuff. But talk about how you came across this guy, Corey Goode, and your research into his life.
Yeah, so basically a couple of years ago, almost a couple of years ago, back then I think it was Gaiam TV, before it was Gaia TV and owned by Clear Channel. There was a station coming out that was sort of an alternative yoga, alternative new age channel that you can even see on your cable channel right now.
Right. I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and so they also had a line of like yoga equipment that you could buy, yoga mats and so on. And so this was a corporation called Gaia, and they just started getting into the television sort of realm. And the first series that they had on, when Jay Widener took over, who Jay Widener is sort of a researcher into investigator too, with the film background into Kubrick. He's known for his Stanley Kubrick theories and a lot of other stuff. And he started to head up the department of production at Gaia
Gotcha.
TV.
Gotcha.
So David Wilcock was one of the first people to be on with that, because he is sort of the new age community and even, you know, past the New Age community, but people just stuck in that consciousness love David Wilcock. Gotcha. And so he had him on, and then David had his own show, and then there was a show that just tried out Corey Goode, who comes out of nowhere, but he doesn't come out of nowhere upon further inspection. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Okay. So he goes on Cosmic Disclosure with David Wilcock and introduced to a larger audience, I would say, at large. And he goes on and talks about the fact that he was in the secret space program for what is called a 20 and 20 back in the program. So you do 20 years in outer space fighting the insects, and something straight out of Battlestar Galactica or something like that. And
Starship Troopers.
Starship Troopers,
right.
Right. Yeah. And so then he comes back to be the ambassador picked by the military. And by the way, when he's come back to Earth, he's because of the advanced technology of Blue Avians and extraterrestrials and all that, they age regressed him right to the point where he supposedly left. And by the way, these memories don't come to him until very late in life when he had no job. So,
right. And interesting. It's like unemployment somehow. It struck him like lightning that he had this.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, listen. I don't want to come off like I hate the guy. Listen, you criticize what you love, but it's just important for the health of if we're gonna have any real research into the secret space program, if those terms are gonna mean anything, we really have to weed out a bunch of the BS, in my opinion, and that's just part and healthy of what we do here, and of thinking individual. So anyway, so Corey Goode comes back and he says that, okay, well, here's the thing, I know all about the inner Earth, outer Earth. I've met the people on the inner Earth. They're called the Mayans, and the people on the outer Earth who you haven't heard about. No one's ever heard about these beings, but they're called the Blue Avians, and wouldn't you know it, they look indigo in color, and they're feathered, tall, humanoid, bird-like beings.
Interesting.
Like Jar Jar 2.0 from George Lucas, if he hadn't sold the rights to Disney, we'd be seeing those things. It was perfect. When I saw that image on these Cosmic Disclosure videos, I said, like they're combining, those dolphin-like, colors.
Can you be careful and just speak clearly into your microphone, because you come in and out of.
Coming sorry about that. Sorry. Yep. So when I saw these Blue Avians, something really was triggered in me, and I noticed that there was something going on in the background on these Cosmic Disclosure videos, and I wasn't the only one. Every time I sent it to somebody, they said they got a really weird feeling right when the Blue Avians are revealed, and shown with the hand signal, the Baphomet, the two thumb and the fingers upward, and one hand downward and stuff like that. So look on further examination of it, it appears that, and a lot of TV producers do this, is they put sort of what is called hemisync or holosync technology into their movies to, put an unconscious level of, brain waves at you or something like that to cause change in your brain. Yeah, and that's been proven to happen. This is just, that's ordinary science, but it was being used for the first time in sort of an ET way, as far as I know. And, I didn't pay too much to do it, but it was there. And as soon as I started talking about it, and I did eventually go on a show and talk about that. So I was very early on to the Blue Avian thing. I talked about how, there's hemisync in there, and how, it really is trying to send a subconscious message almost. So this is 2 years ago, before anyone was talking about it.
Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting. So the hemisync is there as a subtle kind of mind control kind of influencer.
Right.
Gotcha.
And then they took it, and then curiously enough, after I went on the radio and talked about it, the hemisync. And by the way, I wasn't talking about Corey Goode as a person. This whole thing with dark journalists hadn't happened yet. I gave the info to John Rasmus, who's a great investigator of the occult and the anti-occult and frauds and hoaxes. He made a video right away saying that these are probably negative entities if they exist at all, because no one else has, they haven't had the experience of.
Right. So Corey Goode is the only contact between the Blue Avians and humanity, right?
Correct. Exactly. It's almost like a childhood's end scenario where there's an ambassador to this alien group.
Right.
So it comes right out of the scripts from some of Jay Widener's favorite sci-fi stuff. So
it's weird how that correlates with Jay Widener. How long has Jay Widener been over at Gaia?
Think about 2 years.
Right.
Now.
So he starts just as Jay Widener, and actually, it's interesting because I've only seen a couple interviews with Corey Goode, and really just kind of got into the story, believe it or not, today. But he references Jay Widener often and how he convinced Jay Widener that his story is true, and that so he's relying upon this other producer as his kind of something that verifies his story, and also he spends a lot of other time talking about his detractors, which I find interesting, which he seems to have a legion of people questioning the legitimacy or veracity of his story. And it seems like that really has hit kind of a high point within the last 3 months or 4 months. Is that correct?
Correct. And what started that wave off? So, this was 2 years ago. We made the first anti-Blue Avian, not anti-Blue Avian, but pretty much anti-Blue Avian videos and research. I kind of left it alone, but I kept, on the back burner, basically. And I had other researching things and I was into. And, but I was aware of their fast audience starting to grow. People started really to trust Corey Goode and all this. So what happened was, I think about 6 months ago or so, they had a conference, a pretty big annual conference now called Contact in the Desert is the actual name of it. And, they have the biggest names there, in ufology and the paranormal show up. It's a big, well-funded event by, I think, Clear Channel funds it, and a lot of other people. And, everybody's sort of there and they feel like, oh, wow, so cool, part of the group.
They get to hobnob with the glitterati or whatever, the UFOs.
Right, and they actually think they're celebrities. And
right,
then,
it's kind of like a semi-celebrity, yeah.
Yeah,
or the celebrity.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah. So I mean, I kind of know these conferences are, and oftentimes they're not cheap. They cost a pretty penny.
Right. I didn't go, so I don't know. But so anyway, so they had this Contact in the Desert, and there was unveiled their plan, and they had a team, and their team consisted of basically Corey Goode, a person who just passed away named William Tompkins, who was a alleged whistleblower into the secret space program, was something like 90 years old, passed away just on the Eclipse, I think, while he was at the Eclipse of Disclosure conference, because they always have these conferences. Anyway, he's one of them. Michael Sala, I don't know if he was at that meeting, but a guy named Roger Ramsur, who is Corey's business partner, and then who else is on there? A bunch of different, Jordan Sather, Teresa Yarnos, who are these younger YouTubers who are trying to make it, really cool to be part of this. Who's trying to
it's kind of movement, right?
Yeah, because they see Corey making some money and being famous and things like this. So
talk about the money. Is there a significant amount of money in what he's doing, and how does he raise money?
Well, I mean, I'm not. I don't know 100%, but as far as I know, I did hear about some large donations. I'm talking, tens of thousands of dollars. Not some just being donated from individuals, not to mention the book deals and residuals from whatever, So he's making probably a decent living.
Does he have a number of books? I didn't know
he doesn't yet, and that's the thing. The I was going to say at Contact in the Desert, this conference, they had a team meeting where it was unveiled that what they would do is release a book called The Secret Space Program, and they actually added Linda Moulton Howe's name to that presentation on the cover of the book without letting Linda Moulton Howe know, and she was like, "I have nothing to do with that book at all," right? So. Anyway, so they're coming out with a book, a comic book, and a video game is their sort of larger business plan. So it's it's being run like a business right now.
They brought out, I'm looking at this Contact in the Desert, they brought out all the bigwigs. Graham Hancock, George Norrie, Eric Von Daniken, George Lee Sokol, that's the Ancient Aliens guy. Stephen Greer, who was another questionable character.
Mm-hmm.
So Goode was in there. David Wilcock. So yeah, they Whitley Strieber, who I've heard stories about. Jacques Vallée, fascinating guy. Yeah, Lavenda. Well, I can tell you stories about him. I mean, really remarkable. And Lavenda has come out with a book with a guy from what is it? Secret Machines. Yeah, Blink One, which is kind of the same type of thing, right? Aliens, secret space stuff.
It's interesting that exactly, because it's interesting to look at both of those camps and how, first of all, they're not talking to each other and saying, hey, you know, I support you 100%. You know, like, so there's sort of two different factions, I feel, and from the government, because they both are in context. Well, suppose, I mean, Corey's whole thing could be made up. Tom's thing has a little more substance behind it, but let's take it as a, you know, as a given that Corey is in contact with the military, okay, and has been part of the MyLab, according to his bio, part of the MyLabs program since he was about 5 or 6 years old. He was recruited into MyLabs, which is a real, you don't get, as far as I, you know, even Stephen Greer brought this point up with Corey Goode. He's like, well, you know, you don't get recruited.
You got to be close to your microphone.
Okay, I think I'm trying to be as much as possible.
Okay, that's better right there.
All right. So Stephen Greer brought up the point that in a MyLab program, that is an abuse scenario, okay? And you're being abducted. So what is Corey saying? Like, is he part of the abduction scenario? Was he shown crazy things on the psychotronic weaponry, like one of his was Stephen Greer's friend? You know, and he called and he said that a head honcho at Gaia got flipped out about it when Stephen Greer called Corey Goode a victim, if anything, you know? Because a MyLab is an abuse scenario. It's an abduction scenario where you're put under cycles, you know, some really heavy things supposedly. So anyway, now who knows if that's also all allegedly in Goode's case. But anyway, so there you have what you have with Tom DeLonge and Corey Goode are I think disinformation from the military perhaps being distilled with the intermediary thinking they're doing something good for the nation and for the protection of humanity, you know. So
they've got this patina of like, I'm doing good for humanity, but also disinfo program of, I mean, you know, there was a guy online, dark journalist did a thing about Corey Goode and said, you know, he just came in and took up all this other space that other speakers who actually have legitimate research, you know, didn't have time to talk about. So,
and that was, you know, one of these, speakers, Richard Dolan and Joseph Farrell and even Peter Lavenda and stuff like that. So with them and Nick Redfern and anybody who deals with research, you have to have some evidence because, okay, Corey Goode is claiming that he's in constant contact with these Blue Avians, you know, telepathically, and they come down. They take him in a bubble up to their spaceship and all this stuff, right? And it's just him, and they give him permission to, you know, disclose this or that, but they haven't given him one shred of evidence. They haven't given him one tangible.
I mean, isn't that the whole problem with the entirety of the UFO research community?
Yeah.
Is that they never have any evidence. I've seen some of the stuff. I mean, one of the reasons I don't know much about UFOs is because they just discredit themselves by putting out stuff that's ridiculous and no evidence.
Right.
And so I saw this one, like, we've had contact. This is a CGI image. Come on, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. Come on, give me some evidence. And every time I look, it's just a bunch of, you know, I believe me because I saw it. You didn't see it. And so a lot of those UFO stories for me, I think a significant proportion of them are just somebody made up something, you know, to fleece the public.
Or they're a vision or they're channeled material or something like that, you know. So yeah, I mean, and you're right. I mean, it just totally distracts from the real research into, you know, satellite missile programs and things like that.
There's definitely secret space programs. They're putting the American military is putting stuff up into space at least once a year. That's public. That's just public. So God only knows. And you know, they say that they're at least 15, 20 years beyond anything that the public has.
Right. And you got to ask yourself another fundamental question when it comes to these alleged whistleblowers. Now, someone like Snowden, okay, I don't know what you think about him, but he has to be in Russia. You know, I mean, he's not living with freedom. Corey Goode is flying around here and there, going to conferences, open and free to speak as much as he wants.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah.
Any criticism, now if you criticize Corey Goode, or you just ask these basic questions, you are threatened. You are and that's very indicative of Corey Goode's behavior, which was released with this restraining order that I came across. It was that was also released by Dark Journalist too.
It was released by who?
Dark Journalist.
Dark Journalist. So he was the one who saw that, and that was fairly recent, right before he kind of came out as, contactee with these Blue Avian Sphere Alliance.
The restraint, right? I think it's from 2013. I think.
I think it's even be earlier than that. I think it's 15 or 14.
You might be right. I think but there you have actual evidence, and now there's Corey Goode saying, well, that's manufactured evidence, and David Wilkins saying that his brakes were cut, and he almost died, and all this stuff.
Right, this kind of phony narrative that wasn't ever backed up by anybody. But those affidavits, when you write an affidavit to the court like that and put your name on it, it's a very serious thing. If you get caught lying on an affidavit, you go to jail.
Yeah, no. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. See,
there's two different guys who on that Corey Goode affidavit, verified the story and that they weren't there and the guy wasn't even close to his house
Yep, and people don't have the time or I guess to look at that, because if you look at that, the facts of the case are that Corey Goode was fired from this tech company where, allegedly he said he was making a 6-figure salary, so he had no incentive to go into the UFO program circuit at all.
Right, so he's got this kind of phony narrative, yeah.
Oh, yeah, but so anyway, working for this company, he gets fired, he moves away. He makes a YouTube video of himself breaking down in the Darling International, which is Incorporated, which is the plaintiff,
right, in Irving, Texas,
bringing the restraining order.
Yeah,
they basically said, okay, we need to put a restraining order on this ex-employee because he made a YouTube video with a knife through a magazine and saying that Darling broke into his house and left this message because he wanted back. Yeah, so it's this crazy.
Well, the interesting thing also about that restraining order is the Darling and their internal counsel put the written oral narrative of that video in that restraining order for the court. So this is exactly what his statement was, and we have these affidavits that contradict that. So yeah,
good thing, because he took that video down, of course. Wouldn't you know it? I mean, why would he keep it up there, right? So it's good for people. It's funny, you can bring up these research and the way the people in the Corey Goode Blue Avian cult deal with it is by just either ignoring it or character assassinating anyone who questions it, like they did with Greer. They haven't really done with Dolan as much.
What do you mean by Greer? What's the character exact? I mean, what's the story of Greer? So can you give us some background on it?
Yeah, sure. So, so Greer, as I just said, he has some criticisms of Corey Goode, where he just says he's an unreliable witness due to the fact that he's, supposedly in my lab program, which is an abuse scenario, and you can be made to think that there are, beings present and all this. So anyway. Right.
I mean, I've actually heard that about the other guy. He talked about him. It's, now I'm forgetting his name. It was another. We thought that somebody said that guy Basaggio, that's his name.
Yeah.
Also, is a mind control person. That his stories, which are, basically he went to Mars with Obama and fought dinosaurs. The reason why he has this bizarre story is because he's a mind control victim, and he's actually given talks with New Age whack jobs, Ramtha, that lady who Jay-Z Knight who channels Ramtha. He has very strange connections. One of the funny things, just an aside about Basaggio, is I heard his talk, and he supposedly the space shuttle that he takes is located like about 10 blocks away from where I live in LA.
No.
Yeah, it's on the corner of Imperial and Sepulveda,
Oh, yeah.
just south of the airport. And the funny thing is that its address is 999 Sepulveda. So if you flip it up, and there's a huge 999 about 6 feet tall. So if you flip that up, flip it over, it's 666. But I've wanted to. There's like I want to go take their elevators and see if I can get transported to Mars. But it's very hard to believe that building. I mean, it's a corporate building, so that whole story is preposterous.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when they did the Project Camelot True TV pilot, and they have Andrew Bashago there, and he's like, oh, it was right over here, and they're going, it was this TV show. It was like very intense, oh, we're going to find the secret drum room, and then it just cuts to them staring from a rooftop at this business building, like nondescript business building.
Dude, it's like,
and he's like, there it is.
That's absurd. That business. The interesting thing about that business building is it's all glass floors, so you can see into people working there.
Yeah.
And I mean, what are they doing? Is somebody operating a space jump while all these other people are working on, business deals? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and again, that's just a story. His evidence is a photograph from Gettysburg of a little kid. Often he says, "Oh, I was there. That's me. I actually helped Abraham Lincoln out with his address, and then I traveled here."
It's almost like that guy's put out there as a test to see if they can find completely gullible morons who will just believe that. I mean, maybe Goode's like that too. Maybe that's like, who are we finding? I'd be terrified to look at some of the people who actually think he's serious and give him money,
Right, and that's the thing. Well, that's a good point. That's a very good point, because his associations, and you got to wonder who would want this type of. Because if you're thinking, everyone connected to him are profiting or piggybacking up on him in some way, or they just are like, attracted to him or whatever. There's
just
a
that
lot
culture,
of
just like you said, the kind of conference. Internet culture has like mini celebrities, and people want to talk to them, chat with them. It's like they get a little bit of celebrity type of charge off it or something.
And the big outlet for that has been the Fade to Black radio show with Jimmy Church, who comes from like a rock and roll background, and so he makes the UFO paranormal community like as rock stars. You know what I mean? So so he also comes along the scene about 2-3 years ago.
So he's fairly recent. Yeah, interesting. So they're they log roll for each other. I mean, clearly this guy Wilcox is log rolling for Goode, and you ever heard the term log rolling?
Well, I can kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically that's what it means. You both want to stay on top of the log, so you both walk at the same pace.
Yeah, and so everything, is together. Like, people like to think, oh wow, there's so much diversity in the UFO community or whatever, and to some extent that's true, but if you look at the main media voices like Coast to Coast, they're owned by Clear Channel. That's mainstream news. And then what Corey Goode and other people do is their propaganda system works like this. Corey Goode comes out with this article, or Michael Sala comes out with an article. He's a researcher into UFOs and stuff. William Tompkins, rest in peace, comes out with an article, or David Wilcox, somebody in the circle comes out with an article, and it says, the Pope is going to bow down to the Blue Avians. They come together, and you read the article, and it's just nonsense, and it refers to 2 inside sources. And who are those 2 inside sources?
Corey Goode and David Wilcox, right? Oh, wow.
Exactly. And then so they bounce off each other like that, and that's how so people seemingly, and then
so it seemingly has legitimacy, but if you ever looked back and look at their sources, it's about as legit as a $3 bill, right?
Well, they're all profiting in some way from Corey Goode's stardom, if you want to call it that. You know what I mean? Like,
just
they're piggyback.
Just to bounce back, the book that Corey Goode is writing is called "The Case for a Secret Space Program." It has its contributors: Dr. Michael Sala, William Tompkins, who you talked about, Dr. Robert Wood, Corey Goode, with a foreword by David Wilcock and Jay Widener. So,
right.
I mean,
So that tells
yeah.
you up there. I mean, look, I mean, it's connected to the Gaia program ultimately, but it was pretty revealing last night. I mean, Jay Widener went on with a guy named Jay Dyer, who is kind of a film philosophy critic and geopolitic YouTuber and researcher, has a book, Esoteric Hollywood. And now Jay Dyer is out doing a series for Gaia where they're looking at films. And it seems like I got the impression last night that Jay Widener is actually a little sick and tired of the no evidence. He even said it. He said, you know, these stories about no evidence, and it comes from a channeled material. He's like, I don't want anything to do with that.
Interesting. So he's actually trying to move his farther away from secret space program Corey Goode stuff. Is that what it sounds like?
Yeah. Well, I think he's probably keeping it on the back burner. Yeah, I think. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because of this public exposure, and by the way,
so he's trying to move away now that the people know that Corey Goode is less than legit.
Right.
Widener wants to go. Interesting. Yeah,
right.
I mean, I would say that association wouldn't look good to anybody, you know.
Right. So he's putting now because Jay Dyer filmed that I think over a year ago or so. So they're just putting it out now. You know, when you sign a contract with Gaia, by the way, they can use all your material. You don't really make too much money, I heard, off of it. It's kind of like, you know, a silly contract. But anyway, the point is that Jay Widener is kind of like, you know, here, everybody, focus on this now.
Right.
Now, don't focus on this Nazca mummy, which I also introduced. I don't know if you've heard about that, William,
no.
But there's a supposed Nazca mummy discovered in Peru that something like, you know, 10,000 years old or something like that, and they say it's a mummy. But a lot of people think it's just a hoax. You know, this guy Jaime Maussan, who's been caught faking and hoaxing the public. He's a Mexican UFO guy.
Interesting.
He's been caught hoaxing like red-handed, like at least 3 times, like lying straight up to the public. I think he was behind the so-called Roswell slides, the fake alien autopsy, all kinds of stuff. You know, he believed 100%. And
then there's a whole bunch of people who are willing to just grasp onto that, right?
Right, because I think what Jay Widener brings, because he's a director and stuff, is he brings a sort of cinematic feel to these concepts, you know, and these personalities to make you think that they're so cool and the story's so great. You know, and it's very cleverly edited. I got to give it credit. But once you see past it, it's really clear to me anyway. To you know that they're basically it's a fake. You know what I mean,
right.
Or whatever they're putting down. It's edited.
There's like there's the Nazca mummy. There's this little mini thing that people said is an alien. There's been all these little artifacts that people have brought out, and then they look at them. It's just like it's the same thing that happened in Darwinism, where they would find the missing link, all these
men,
all these Piltdown men, and they were all frauds. They're all complete frauds, and the same thing happens in Jerusalem. They have whole storage facilities for all these fake things that people have produced and tried to say, this is Jesus's sarcophagus, and tried to sell that, and this happens because people know when they create those fakes that there's a market for them. There's all these people waiting for that proof, and they've been busted all the time. There was a guy who was swindling the Mormon Church, creating fake documents, and it's a fascinating story. I can't remember that story. What he would do, he was a master forger, and what he would do is go find old books that were from that time frame, from the mid 1850s, and rip out empty pages. So the paper would be the exact kind of paper, and then he'd forge it with ink, and people would verify them as authentic. So he was so good that he could get third parties to verify the docs, and he finally got caught because once it started to unravel, he bombed people. It's a really incredible story, and it turned out he was like an occultist who was trying to bring down the Mormon Church. It was really fascinating. Anyway, there's all kinds of forgeries and stuff out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. But yet, I mean, so you have forgeries going on, and some people say this could never be fake. Of course it could be faked.
Yeah,
I mean, take one look at the thing, you know, I mean, come on. And then so they're supposedly doing all this testing on it, and you know, a lot of people say it's fake. You know, even the people who go to the conferences, that's the limits where they're allowed to disagree. It's almost like, okay, I kind of disagree with that on that, and they'll allow that. Gotcha. But if you say one thing about Corey Goode, or you start to introduce evidence like the restraining order, which is 100% fact, right. You know, and you can tell, you just said, like, you can't lie to the court. You know what I mean?
You can. You just get it busted. I mean, you can. I've learned enough legal documents, and you have too, when people are testifying or relaying their information with veracity. I mean, all those pieces fit together. You know, so. I mean, it's interesting that it's not often that a corporation goes through those steps to actually get a restraining order through through the courts. It's very unusual.
I was going to say, it's pretty costly, right?
Yeah, costly, unusual, time drain. You know, you got to pay, you got to file and get all that stuff together. Usually, it doesn't happen. So they saw something. I mean, if you look at that document, I think Goode lasted at that job 7 weeks, which is a wretched performance. You know, it's really something
normal. If you looked at his LinkedIn profile, which I haven't too much, but according to his LinkedIn profile, which he references to show his proof that he was making a 6-figure salary in the IT industry, but then he says that he learned it all in like 6 months, and so it's weird. Yeah. So, but if you look at it, it's all company after. It's like 16 companies on there or whatever. It's a long list, and I don't think any of them are per year.
I mean, there's his darling. It says he was there 4 months, but that affidavit says 7 weeks. So,
see, I mean, he could be lying. So, I mean, this is the point is that you have to question these people, and you know, when I told Neil Sanders, who Ed Offerman just today,
the Manson book,
interview with him, the Manson book, and I did an interview with him right before Ed did, and I brought up the Blue Avians to Neil. And he's like, well, tell me a bit about him. And so I did. He's like, okay. He's like, so I'm thinking George Adamski. And he rattled off all these names. I'm like, what's that from? And he said, I was like, who's George Adamski? And he's like, well, this is a guy that, you know, in the 60s and 70s. And I mean, there's hundreds of people who's saying that they are in contact with alien beings from another dimension or whatever, or another planet or star system. And, you know, it's about their relationship. Now, if you look at George Adamski, you know, people say, well, there's no motive for him to lie. Well, yeah, there is. There's fame, money, you know what I mean? Those people kill. There's a lot, you know what I mean? There's a lot of incentive for him to do this.
Tons of incentive.
Especially when he's fired from Darling, and then, you know, goes into PTSD mode and has a restraining order put on him.
Yeah.
And then now what has happened to the critics is that they've released, this is important to mention, that they've released and very much promoted a gang stalking video aimed at people in Boston, which would probably be me and dark journalist Daniel List, who I didn't know lived in Boston, but is where I live too. And it was basically gang stalking Bill Ryan, who was very critical. He runs the Project Avalon Forum. This has been a forum for about, I don't know how many years, but for 8 years, Corey Goode was on that forum before he came forward. In fact, Project Avalon did the first interview with Corey Goode. You have
to speak into the mic, dude. Speak into the mic.
Yeah, you have. Okay, so Project Avalon did a video, a video with Corey Goode, which was his first video, right around the time that he got the restraining order from Darling. And the story is completely different. You know what I mean? It's Illuminati Insider or something like that. It's so it's just really interesting to see all the connections and just the elaborate web of deceit. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's really, I mean, it really takes basics to say, okay, wow, okay, this is a legit restraining order. Oh, wow, why didn't you tell us about this? Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the guy from Project Avalon wrote an article titled "The Truth About Corey Goode."
Yeah,
and said that he was compromised and inauthentic.
Yeah, because Corey Goode, while he says, "Oh, all the critics are from Project Avalon Forum," or they're all part of this dark alliance, which is trying to kill me. Now, I wouldn't want anything to happen. I wouldn't want these people murdered and tortured. He actually says this. I have screenshots. I'll look happy to share. Just go to his Facebook page. He'll say, I wouldn't want anything to happen. It would be so terrible if the Dark Alliance were to torture and murder these critics, and dark journalists. And dark journalists was, I mean, that's a threat. And it's a threat it's a very veiled threat, but it doesn't really take a genius to look past the veiled threat.
Right.
I mean, you can see Godfather where he's just like, it'd be a shame if anything happened to your family or a car accident. You know what I mean?
Right.
And all this thing, and it's very easy to play the persecuted person, right? Throughout all history, people say, king and tyrants everywhere say they're persecuted when they're really not. These persecuted. I'm the victim. I'm persecuted by this dark alliance. This is fake evidence. And
right. So can you define what Corey Goode says that there's some dark, capital D, capital A, dark alliance that is trying to frustrate his ability to talk to people. So what is the dark alliance supposedly?
Well, allegedly, this is just first of all, it's a video game about aliens from a couple of years ago, where I think you got the idea. But it's basically so Corey Goode conveniently links every criticism of him to Bill Ryan or dark journalists, and that does two different things. It ignores the legitimate criticism coming from, say, me or from C.W. Chanter, a guy who's been on him for about 2 years anyway too. We're completely John Rasmus. All these.
Oh, there's more. I know other individuals whose names I won't mention, but there's other beyond that who've made very, I would say very important statements about this guy.
Randy Moggins has been very active about it too.
Who I was talking about.
Yep, and I don't think he'll mind if I mention it. But the thing is, they don't mention him. There's a reason why they don't mention any of these people. It's and it's because we're legitimate. We don't have a stake in this at all. We're not here to destroy Corey Goode as a person.
Not in that environment, right? Not in the
UFO
disclosure environment.
No, it's just from taking a cursory glance at something I think is a fraud, and then on further inspection becomes really turns into something quite dangerous, even, and not just for me on a personal level, when they say they're going to send people or they have people in Boston, or how bad it would be for the Dark Alliance to be tortured and murdered or whatever. I really care about the younger people who are following this with all their soul, because they've lost religion. Because they, like, for example, Teresa Yarnos, who does she's called The Divine Frequency. If you look at her original first video, nice, Catholic girl with brown hair. It's very nice, and still is, and everything. But then, after like a 6-7 month absence, she comes back promoting Corey Goode, has dyed blonde hair, and totally different, and just constantly promoting Corey Goode, the Blue Avians, and the conferences around those figures, and then responses to. But she's really great, and I don't want, like. And her boyfriend Jordan Sather, who they're all trying to build their brand around the Corey Goode brand, the secret. So they have to support. But they're young. They're sort of in my generation, and I care about them. I care about their souls, honestly. I don't want to see somebody worshiping a Blue Avian, or like they had the Eclipse Disclosure conference, because they always have these conferences so they can constantly travel and not really be served or have a domicile.
Right. So, I mean, that's interesting, because you told me earlier that Goode isn't even has a residence. He's traveling around in an RV. Is that correct?
From what I hear from some inside sources, they tell me that, he's like L. Ron Hubbard style. You know how
right. Absolutely. L. Ron Hubbard got on a boat and traveled to Spain, Morocco, all the other places. Yeah.
To avoid being
served. Absolutely. Tax
and
problems.
I have a feeling that Corey Goode's doing the same, and he's constantly traveling. I mean, he'll be the first to tell you that.
Yeah, and again, sure he has a good cover for that. The Dark Alliance is out to get me. I got to keep moving. I got to stay on the road.
So it's an invented catchphrase by Wilcock and Corey Goode to basically put every single critic under the heading of the Dark Alliance. It's so stupid. I'm not part of a Dark Alliance. You know what I mean? Like,
so what's the next step for this guy Good? I mean, he's just going to try to write books and to maintain his credibility. Does he have rabid followers? I mean, is he like trying to create a group of core followers? I mean, is this like a Marshall Applewhite character, or is this, I don't, what?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, that's what scares me.
I don't know.
I don't know either. Yeah. But one thing is that the critic, I mean, he's traveling around. It reminds me of some UFO Christian cult, like people that combined sort of Christianity and ETs, and they ended up being like a death cult kind of. Like I forget the names of them, but one of what was the one in Rancho Santa Fe, California?
That was Heaven's Gate. That was Marshall Applewhite, I think.
Okay, that's so.
But there was another one. There was one. What was the one? The Solar Temple, whatever. They all went crazy, and that happened. That was actually a Crowley cult. They were into the Golden Dawn and OTO.
Really?
And that was featured on Occult Crimes. Have you watched the Occult Crimes series on what?
Yes, I have. Yeah,
I'm in there.
Yeah,
I was in there.
Yeah, I know. I saw it. It was awesome.
I was supposed to be there. They did a full hour with me about the West Memphis 3, but it got spiked.
Oh, no kid. Of course it did.
That was primarily why they interviewed me, was for the West Memphis 3. Yeah. But then they took little pieces of me and interspersed it throughout the different ones, because they had talked about the guy who did it. His name was Christian. What was his last name? Christian Page, who was a French Canadian, and that's why a lot of the stuff was in French. But he did we did the West Memphis 3, but I think he got some of his ideas from my book Abomination, because I included a bunch of occult crimes in there, and then they showed up in the thing, like the Rippers, the Chicago Ripper killers.
Well, I was gonna say, because it's called Occult Crimes, and you're known for your great work on Crowley and on the West Memphis 3, and here you are on a totally unrelated part of the show. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, no, they got spiked. There was I did a good 2 hours on the West Memphis 3. And I was interviewed here in Los Angeles, and it's gone, man. It's on the cutting floor. He might put it out on a different thing. Who knows? But go through and look. If you compare all the occult crimes, see, the whole thing about the West Memphis 3 is supposedly it wasn't a occult crime, and there's no such thing as occult crimes, And so that's why I put that list in Abominations, is to show that some people are motivated by occults. And the FBI had some deranged, nonsensical legal terminology, something that you could probably appreciate and understand, is when you put in this strained definition, therefore this thing didn't happen, because their definition of occult crimes, you have to have two people who plot and talk about Satanism and then commit the crime in a ritual manner, and if it's not that way, it's not an occult crime. It didn't make sense.
So they have to talk specifically about just Satanism, or
something. I have to go get how they weaseled out of defining occult motivated crimes. I did hear
that a lot of the I think that that was an excuse a lot for Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, and a lot of the occult crimes, when they were traced back to him, he would say, well, no, you can't. I'm protected under this law, or something like that. But that's interesting. That's
interesting that you bring up Aquino, because you thought, do you want to talk about that guy, Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez?
Sure. Yeah. Well,
This is associated with Corey Goode. He has some kind of secret helper by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez, right?
Yes. And so this secret, no one's been able to verify who this is. I know a person who actually said that he pretended to be Gonzalez. He said, I'm Gonzalez. He's like, tell Corey to look at my profile picture. He'll understand. And then this person called into the Fade to Black show, while Corey was on.
Interesting.
And so, or something like that. Next night, they did a pre-interview with Corey to see if it was actually him. He's like, what kind of car did you show up at, or when I met you, or some kind of crazy questions. But the point is that he bought it, that it was just a random person, and so it's really nobody. I don't think. I think is more likely. However, lieutenant colonel that I think of when I think of the person who's been featured and has their hands all over this UFO community is Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. I mean, he said it plenty of times. He's been on a lot of these radio stations with Dr. J Live and a lot of these conspiracy theory shows. You know, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. Who? So anyway, Corey Goode says that Gonzalez is this guy. I think, I'm not sure where he's based out of, but he is sort of this military interlocutor liaison between the extraterrestrials and the Blue Avians and stuff. And he was so surprised that Corey was chosen to be the ambassador of Earth to the Blue Avians. Now, you would think that if he was a highly intuitive empath, that he could intuit that, you know, these restraining orders would be out. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that he wouldn't give threats out there, or veiled threats. Oh, he's an empath, but you know, he can't even really. He just attacks people, and not just him. Like, you know, the people who are basically making money off of him, or notoriety, or whatever. They think they're celebrities because now the technology has changed, where it's so personal that anybody can get on YouTube, and now the whole world is watching you. You know, so they have this false feeling of celebrity-dom and stuff, and it's really not that, you know, but they really relish in that power, I think. So yeah, anyway, this Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez, that's, I think Corey says that, you know, really part of his whole story with the Blue Avians, you know, it's either non-existent and just made up, or it could most likely be Colonel Michael Aquino.
Interesting. I mean, he's still out there. Aquino's around. I know he's done interviews this year, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I mean, and you know what's interesting is that he must have been listening to whatever I was doing at the time, because I was on a radio show and I was saying we were talking about Aquino, the Necronomicon, and Peter Lavenda's connection, right?
Peter Lavenda is Simon. It's 100% verified.
100%.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. So now there's more to that, and now that has to do with Avon Press and all, long story. But I was basically making the connections between Aquino, Lavenda, and I didn't know, you know, 100%, but I was kind of saying, okay, well, it is interesting that he takes things from the Necronomicon, and then wouldn't you know it, the next day, or something like the next week, they were on Dr. J Live together on the same show, talking up to each other and giving each other accolades and all that stuff, and you know, respecting each other's work. And you know, for people who don't know, Michael Aquino is the founder of the Temple of Set and a high bird, you know, colonel and all that, and very
master of psychological operations.
Absolutely.
I mean, his friend, he wrote that whole book. What was it? Mind War. Mind War: The Future Beyond Psychological Operations. But the interesting thing about that is that his co-writer was a guy who was heavily involved in the Bush administration and is on Fox News all the time. Yeah, was
that John Alexander?
What's that?
Colonel John Alexander?
No,
Colonel John.
No, his name is. I'll find it. But,
it's okay. But John Alexander is another colonel who is very influenced by Aquino and the Mind War. And
Paul Valley, commander.
Paul Valley.
No, Valley. He was on Fox News all the time. He was a go-to guy. Yeah, so that book, it's from Psy-War to Mind War, Psychology of Victory. That's the end of the show. Thank you for listening.